Get that boy out of my courtroom before he makes a fool of himself. Judge Harold Collins points his gavel directly at 10-year-old Jamal Washington like a weapon. The packed courtroom gasps. Sarah Washington's face crumples in humiliation. "This is a place for adults, son, not children who clearly don't belong here," Collins sneers, his voice dripping with contempt. Every head turns. Whispers fill the air. The bailiff steps forward to escort Jamal out. But the boy doesn't budge. Instead, Jamal pulls out a thick legal folder and locks eyes with the judge. His voice cuts through the tension like steel. "Your Honor, I'm exactly where I belong, and I have something that's going to change everything." Collins's confident smirk vanishes. The room holds its breath. Have you ever been told you don't belong somewhere, then watched as you proved them devastatingly wrong? 2 months earlier, life looked completely different for the Washington family. Sarah Washington had been the head nurse at Mercy General Hospital for 8 years. Patients loved her gentle touch and sharp medical instincts. Colleagues respected her dedication. She worked double shifts without complaint, always arriving early and staying late to ensure every patient received the best care possible. Her apartment might have been small, but it was filled with warmth. Medical textbooks shared shelf space with her son's homework assignments. Jamal's report cards, all A's, were proudly displayed on the refrigerator alongside Sarah's nursing certifications. Jamal was unlike any 10-year-old you'd ever meet. While other kids played video games, he devoured legal textbooks from the public library. While they watched cartoons, he studied Supreme Court cases. His photographic memory meant he could recite entire constitutional amendments word for word after reading them just once. "Mom, did you know the Civil Rights Act has 17 different sections?" he'd announce over breakfast, casually dropping legal knowledge that would impress law school professors. Sarah would smile and ruffle his hair. "Baby, most kids your age are worried about spelling tests, not civil rights legislation." But Jamal wasn't most kids. He saw the world differently. Every injustice was a puzzle to solve. Every unfair situation was a legal problem with a constitutional solution. When neighborhood kids complained about unfair treatment at school, Jamal would explain their rights under the 14th Amendment. When elderly Mrs. Rodriguez next door worried about her landlord illegally raising rent, Jamal researched tenant protection laws and helped her draft a formal complaint. The walls of his bedroom told the story of a young mind obsessed with justice. Hand-drawn charts connected famous legal cases. Sticky notes covered his mirror with quotes from Thurgood Marshall and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. His backpack always contained at least 3 law books alongside his regular schoolwork. Sarah often wondered where this passion came from. She'd never shown particular interest in law beyond watching the occasional courtroom drama on TV. But watching her son's eyes light up when he discovered a new legal principle made her proud in ways she couldn't fully explain. "One day, I'm going to be a lawyer and help people who can't help themselves," Jamal would declare with the absolute certainty only children possess. Sarah never doubted he would do exactly that. Then everything changed on a Tuesday morning in October. Jamal was at school when Sarah noticed something troubling during her rounds at Mercy General. Dr. Richard Pemberton, the chief of medicine, was prescribing significantly different pain medications for black patients compared to white patients with identical conditions. The disparities weren't subtle, they were systematic and deliberate. When Sarah reviewed the medical charts, the pattern became undeniable. White patients received comprehensive pain management protocols. Black patients received minimal treatment with instructions to tough it out. The medical justifications were flimsy at best, discriminatory at worst. Sarah faced an impossible choice: stay silent and keep her job, or speak up and risk everything. For someone who dedicated her life to healing, there was really no choice at all. She documented everything methodically, then requested a meeting with the hospital administration. She presented her findings professionally, hoping they would investigate and correct the problem quietly. Instead, they fired her 3 days later. The official reason was, failure to follow proper protocols. The real reason was written in the hostile glances and whispered conversations that followed her final shift. She dared to challenge the system, and the system was pushing back. Within a week, Sarah discovered that Mercy General had contacted other hospitals in the area, effectively blacklisting her from nursing positions throughout the city. Her 8 years of exemplary service meant nothing. Her patients' testimonials counted for nothing. Her dedication to medical ethics had made her unemployable. As eviction notices piled up on their kitchen table and job rejection letters filled their mailbox, Sarah watched her son studying legal precedents late into the night. She didn't have the heart to tell him that sometimes the law wasn't enough to protect good people from powerful institutions. But Jamal was already figuring that out on his own, and he was preparing to do something about it. The rejection letters started arriving like a slow, cruel drumbeat. Thank you for your interest in our nursing position. After careful consideration, we have decided to move forward with other candidates who better fit our current needs. Sarah read the same polite rejection over and over. Each one a knife twist in her stomach. 15 applications, 15 rejections, all from hospitals where she'd never even gotten an interview. The nursing director at St. Mary's Hospital was more honest than the others when Sarah called to follow up. Look, Sarah, I'm going to be straight with you. The woman's voice was sympathetic but firm. Word gets around in this industry. Mercy General's chief administrator made some calls. They're saying you're a troublemaker, someone who doesn't follow a chain of command. Fair or not, that's the reputation you're carrying now. Sarah's hands trembled as she hung up the phone. 8 years of perfect performance reviews, countless patient commendations, and medical excellence awards meant nothing against the whisper campaign designed to destroy her career. The pattern was becoming clear. Mercy General wasn't just firing her, they were systematically destroying her ability to work anywhere in the medical field. It was a character assassination disguised as professional networking. Meanwhile, Judge Harold Collins was building his own reputation in family court. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he presided over cases involving employment disputes, custody battles, and civil rights claims. His track record spoke volumes about his priorities. The Rodriguez family had sued their landlord for housing discrimination. Collins dismissed the case, ruling that cultural misunderstandings didn't constitute illegal bias. Marcus Thompson, a black veteran, had filed for disability benefits after being denied coverage that white veterans with identical injuries received automatically. Collins ruled that Thompson hadn't proven sufficient hardship and suggested he find work that accommodated his limitations. LaToya Williams had been passed over for promotion at her accounting firm despite superior qualifications, watching as less experienced white colleagues advanced ahead of her. Collins found her evidence of discrimination circumstantial at best and noted that sometimes the most qualified person on paper isn't the best fit for leadership. The pattern was unmistakable to anyone paying attention, but few people were watching closely enough to connect the dots. Collins was careful. He used legal language that sounded reasonable on the surface while consistently ruling against black plaintiffs who dared to challenge workplace discrimination. His courtroom had become a place where justice wore a blindfold, not to ensure fairness, but to avoid seeing the systematic bias playing out under its nose. Sarah didn't know about Collins's reputation yet. She was too busy trying to survive. The bills kept multiplying like a hydra. Each one she managed to pay spawned 2 more in its place. Rent, $12,200, due in 5 days. Electric bill, $247, past due with disconnect notice. Jamal's school lunch account, overdrawn by $73. Health insurance, canceled due to non-payment. Car insurance, suspended. Credit card minimum payment, $89, accruing $45 in late fees. Medical bills from Jamal's last checkup, $340. Sarah took whatever work she could find. She cleaned office buildings at night for $12 an hour, her knees aching as she scrubbed floors until 3 a.m. She waited tables at Jimmy's Diner during lunch shifts. forcing smiles while customers complained about cold coffee and slow service, earning minimum wage plus tips that barely covered bus fare home. She picked up weekend shifts at Suds and Bubbles' laundromat, folding other people's clothes while her own son wore the same 3 shirts to school in rotation. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was washing the uniforms of nurses who still had jobs at hospitals that wouldn't hire her. The worst part wasn't the exhaustion that settled into her bones like cement. It wasn't the financial stress that made her stomach churn every time she opened the mailbox. It was watching the light dim in Jamal's eyes as their world slowly collapsed around them. "Mom, why don't you just call Dr. Pemberton and apologize?" Jamal asked one evening as they shared a dinner of instant ramen noodles. Again. His school had started sending home notices about his unpaid lunch fees, and Sarah saw the shame in his face when he had to skip the hot meal line. "Maybe if you tell him you were wrong about the medication thing, he'll help you get your job back." Sarah's heart broke a little more. Her brilliant, justice-minded son was asking her to lie about discrimination to make their problems disappear. The system was teaching him that survival mattered more than truth. "Baby, I wasn't wrong about what I saw. The black patients were being treated differently, and that's not right. Sometimes doing the right thing costs more than we want to pay." "But it's not fair," Jamal said, his voice cracking with frustration. "You helped people. You saved lives. How can they just throw that away?" "Because the people making the decisions care more about protecting their reputation than protecting patients," Sarah replied, pulling him close. "But that doesn't mean we stop fighting for what's right." That night, Jamal lay awake listening to his mother cry quietly in the next room. The thin walls of their apartment couldn't contain the sound of dreams dying. At 10 years old, he understood more about injustice than most adults ever would. And he was beginning to understand something else. The system wasn't broken by accident. It was designed to protect powerful people at the expense of everyone else. But understanding the problem and fixing it were 2 entirely different challenges. 3 weeks later, the eviction notice arrived. Sarah stared at the legal document with numb disbelief. The official letterhead, the formal language, the finality of it all felt like a death sentence. 30 days to vacate the premises. After that, the sheriff would physically remove them from the only home Jamal had ever known. "We could stay with your cousin in Detroit," Sarah suggested weakly, knowing it wasn't really an option. Her cousin's apartment was barely big enough for her own family, and Sarah had no prospects for work in a new city where her reputation hadn't been systematically destroyed yet. Jamal looked up from his homework, a legal research project he'd assigned himself about employment discrimination. The public library had become his second home, a refuge where he could lose himself in case law and constitutional precedents while their world fell apart around them. "Mom, what if there was another way? What if we could prove they were wrong to fire you?" "Honey, I can't afford a lawyer. The public defender's office said employment cases aren't their priority, and private attorneys want retainer fees starting at $5,000. I don't have $5, let alone $5,000. "But what if we didn't need to hire someone?" Jamal's voice carried a strange intensity. "What if we could represent ourselves?" Sarah almost laughed, but something in her son's expression stopped her. There was a focus in his eyes she'd never seen before, a determination that reminded her of herself when she'd first decided to report Dr. Pemberton's discriminatory practices. "Baby, employment law is complicated. It's not something you can just figure out by reading library books." "Actually, Mom, I think it is." Jamal pulled out a notebook filled with his careful handwriting, pages covered with legal citations, case summaries, and detailed analysis that would have impressed law school professors. "I've been researching wrongful termination cases for 3 weeks. Did you know that whistleblower protection laws make it illegal to fire someone for reporting discrimination? And did you know that if we can prove Mercy General contacted other hospitals to prevent you from getting hired, that's called conspiracy and it violates federal anti-retaliation statutes?" Sarah stared at her son in amazement. While she'd been drowning in despair, working multiple jobs just to delay their inevitable financial collapse, he'd been building a legal lifeline one research session at a time. "The filing deadline is next Friday," Jamal continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "If we don't submit the lawsuit by then, we lose our right to sue forever according to the statute of limitations. But, Mom, I think we have a case. I think we can win." For the first time in months, Sarah felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. But hope, she was about to learn, could be the most dangerous emotion of all, especially when you're going up against people who have everything to lose and every advantage on their side. The decision came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday night. Sarah had just finished her shift at the laundromat, her back aching from lifting industrial washing machines and her hands raw from folding clothes for 8 straight hours. She walked into their apartment to find Jamal still awake at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of library books and legal documents. "Baby, you should be asleep. You have school tomorrow." Jamal looked up with bloodshot eyes but unwavering determination. "Mom, I found something big." He spread 3 case files across the table, like a detective revealing crucial evidence. Each folder was meticulously organized with color-coded tabs and handwritten summaries that demonstrated legal reasoning far beyond his years. "Remember how you said we needed proof that Mercy General blacklisted you? I found the legal precedent that shows exactly how to prove it." His finger traced across a highlighted section of text. "Thompson versus Morrison Industries, 1995. A nurse reported unsafe practices, got fired, then discovered her employer had contacted other hospitals to prevent her from getting hired elsewhere." Sarah's exhaustion evaporated as she leaned in closer. "What happened to her?" "She won. Big time. The court ruled that coordinated blacklisting violates federal anti-retaliation statutes. She got her job back, received full back pay, and the hospital had to pay punitive damages of $250,000. "Jamal, that's amazing research, but how do we prove Mercy General actually called other hospitals?" Her son's eyes lit up with the excitement of someone who just solved an impossible puzzle. "Phone records, Mom. Corporate phone logs are discoverable in civil litigation. If we file the lawsuit, we can subpoena their communications records and prove they coordinated to destroy your career." Sarah stared at the legal documents covering their kitchen table. Her 10-year-old son had taught himself enough employment law to build a compelling case against one of the city's most powerful medical institutions. It should have been impossible, but the evidence was right there in his careful handwriting. "There's more," Jamal continued, pulling out another folder. "I researched the judge who'll hear our case. Harold Collins has been assigned to employment discrimination cases for 3 years. His track record is concerning." Sarah watched as Jamal laid out case after case where Collins had ruled against black plaintiffs, always finding technical reasons to dismiss valid discrimination claims. The pattern was unmistakable once you saw it clearly. "He's not going to want to rule in our favor," Sarah said quietly. "No, he's not. But that's exactly why we have to be perfect. Every legal argument has to be flawless. Every piece of evidence has to be undeniable. We can't give him any excuse to dismiss our case." Sarah looked at her son, really looked at him, for the first time in weeks. While she'd been focusing on immediate survival, working multiple jobs to keep them housed and fed, Jamal had been preparing for war. A legal war against institutions designed to crush people exactly like them. "Baby, are you sure about this? If we file this lawsuit and lose, we'll have spent our last bit of money on filing fees and court costs, and Mercy General might come after us for their legal expenses." Jamal met her gaze with the steady confidence of someone twice his age. "Mom, if we don't file, we lose everything anyway. The eviction notice gives us 3 weeks. After that, we're homeless and you still don't have a job. But if we fight back and win, we get justice and the money to rebuild our lives. And if we fight back and lose, then at least we go down swinging instead of just giving up." Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. For months, she'd been reacting to circumstances beyond her control, scrambling to survive each new crisis as it emerged. But Jamal was offering her something different, a chance to stop running and start fighting. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to her diner shift and accompanied Jamal to the public library. She watched in amazement as her son navigated legal databases like a seasoned attorney, pulling case files and cross-referencing statutes with surgical precision. "The key is the timing," Jamal explained as he printed out forms for filing a civil lawsuit. "We need to document every hospital that rejected you, then subpoena their hiring records to show they had positions available but chose less qualified candidates. That establishes a pattern of coordinated discrimination." "How do you know all this?" "I've been reading 8 hours a day for 3 weeks, Mom. Constitutional law, federal employment statutes, civil procedure rules. It's like learning a new language, but once you understand the grammar, it all starts making sense." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and heartbreak watching her son work. He should have been playing with friends or worrying about math homework, not teaching himself federal litigation procedures because the adults in his life had failed to protect them. That afternoon, they visited the courthouse to file their complaint. The clerk looked skeptical when Sarah explained they were representing themselves, but the paperwork was properly formatted, and the filing fee was paid in crumpled bills Jamal had helped count out 3 times to make sure they had enough. "Ma'am, are you sure you don't want to wait and try to find legal representation?" the clerk asked. "Employment discrimination cases are complex, and you'll be going up against experienced corporate attorneys." Sarah looked down at Jamal, who squeezed her hand encouragingly. "We have all the representation we need." Walking out of the courthouse, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Control. They were no longer passive victims of circumstances beyond their influence. They were plaintiffs in a federal lawsuit, armed with evidence and legal precedent, ready to demand justice from a system that had tried to silence them. "What happens next?" Sarah asked as they waited for the bus home. Jamal pulled out a notebook filled with his timeline of legal procedures. "Mercy General has 21 days to respond to our complaint. During that time, we gather more evidence and prepare for depositions. Then we have 90 days of discovery, where we can subpoena documents and interview witnesses under oath. And then? Then we go to trial and prove that discrimination is expensive." Jamal's voice carried a steely determination that reminded Sarah why she'd fallen in love with nursing in the first place, the fierce commitment to fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. For the first time since her termination, Sarah went to sleep that night without crying. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they would meet them as fighters, not victims. The David and Goliath battle was about to begin. And David had been studying his enemy's weaknesses for weeks. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday afternoon in the courthouse's public records room. Jamal sat hunched over a microfilm machine, scrolling through decade-old court cases with methodical precision. His eyes burned from hours of reading faded legal documents, but something was nagging at him about Judge Collins's judicial history. "Jamal, honey, maybe we should focus on our own case," Sarah suggested from across the table. "No, Mom, there's something here. I can feel it." Then he saw it. Thompson versus Morrison Industries, filed March 15, 1995, presided over by Judge Harold Collins. Jamal's heart started racing as he read the details. Patricia Thompson, a black nurse, had been fired after reporting discriminatory treatment of patients. But what happened next made his hands shake with excitement. Judge Collins had ruled in favor of the plaintiff. Not only had he ruled in her favor, he had written a passionate opinion condemning workplace retaliation and racial discrimination. Jamal printed the entire ruling, his mind spinning as he absorbed Collins's own words. "The court finds that no employee should face termination for reporting discriminatory practices," Collins had written. "This court will not tolerate institutional retaliation against healthcare workers who courageously speak truth to power." Mom, you need to see this right now. Sarah hurried over as Jamal spread the pages across the table. What did you find? Judge Collins ruled on a case almost identical to ours in 1995. A black nurse reported discrimination, got fired, then sued for wrongful termination. But here's the thing. He ruled for the nurse. Sarah scanned the document, her eyes widening as she read Collins's own words condemning the exact behavior Mercy General had used against her. This is incredible. He specifically cited federal statutes that make it illegal for employers to blacklist workers who report discrimination. The same statutes that apply to our case. Jamal's voice trembled with excitement. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as the implications became clear. So, if he ruled this way before, he'll have to rule the same way again, or he'll be contradicting his own legal precedent. Judges hate being inconsistent on the record. Jamal pointed to the most damning quote. This court will enforce protection for those who protect others without hesitation or compromise. The words hung in the air like a promise. Judge Collins himself had established legal precedent that would be nearly impossible to ignore without exposing himself to accusations of judicial bias. The legal similarities are identical, Jamal continued. Same industry, same type of discrimination reporting, same pattern of employer retaliation. He can't distinguish our case without applying different standards to similar situations. Sarah stared at the documents. Her 10-year-old son had discovered a legal trap that could force Judge Collins to rule in their favor using his own previous judgment. The key is timing, Jamal said, carefully organizing the Thompson case documents. We don't lead with this discovery. We let him start ruling against us, then we spring the trap by citing his own precedent. As they packed up their research materials, Sarah realized they were no longer just fighting for survival. They were about to expose a sitting judge's inconsistent application of justice, using his own rulings as evidence. It was the kind of legal checkmate that practicing attorneys spent careers trying to achieve. And it was all happening because a 10-year-old boy refused to accept that powerful people couldn't be held accountable. The morning of the hearing arrived with gray skies and bitter cold. Sarah's hands trembled as she adjusted her one-good dress, the same navy blue outfit she'd worn to job interviews that never materialized. Beside her, Jamal clutched his backpack containing their carefully organized legal documents and the explosive Thompson case precedent. They entered courtroom 4B to find Mercy General's legal team already assembled. 3 attorneys in expensive suits huddled around the defendant's table, their briefcases worth more than Sarah's monthly rent. Lead counsel Marcus Whitfield looked like he'd stepped out of a corporate law commercial. Silver hair, confident posture, and the kind of smile that said he'd never lost a case he cared about winning. Judge Collins entered with his usual theatrical flair, black robes flowing as he took his position behind the elevated bench. His eyes swept the courtroom with practiced authority before settling on the plaintiff's table with obvious disdain. This is case number 2024 CV 8847, Washington v. Mercy General Hospital. I see we have... Collins paused, squinting at his paperwork. Pro se representation for the plaintiff? Yes, Your Honor. Sarah stood nervously. I'm representing myself with assistance from my son. Collins's eyebrows shot up. Your son? How old is this child? 10 years old, Your Honor. A ripple of murmurs spread through the gallery. Collins's face darkened with irritation as his gaze fixed on Jamal. Ma'am, this is a federal employment discrimination case, not a school presentation. I suggest you find actual legal representation before we proceed. Your Honor, Sarah's voice gained strength. We've filed all proper paperwork and met every procedural requirement. We're prepared to present our case. Mrs. Washington, employment law is extraordinarily complex. You're facing experienced corporate attorneys who specialize in these matters. This is not a place for amateur hour. Collins gestured dismissively toward Mercy General's legal team. I'm inclined to grant a continuance until you secure appropriate counsel. That's when Jamal stood up. Your Honor, if I may address the court? The room fell silent. Collins stared down at the small figure with a mixture of disbelief and growing annoyance. Young men, children do not address the court in my courtroom. This is not a playground. I understand that, Your Honor, but Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 11 states that any person may represent themselves in federal court. And Family Court Act, Section 249, allows for next friend representation when the individual demonstrates sufficient legal knowledge. Collins's mouth fell open slightly. Several people in the gallery leaned forward. Even Mercy General's attorneys looked surprised. Son, do you have any idea what you just said? Yes, sir. I cited the federal rule that gives us the right to represent ourselves and the state statute that allows me to assist my mother as her next friend's representative, provided I can demonstrate adequate legal understanding. Collins's face began to redden. This is highly irregular. I will not allow this courtroom to become a circus. Your Honor, Jamal continued calmly, we're not asking for special treatment. We're asking for the same rights available to every American citizen under federal civil procedure. The law doesn't have an age requirement for legal knowledge. Marcus Whitfield stood up, sensing an opportunity. Your Honor, plaintiff's attempt to use a child as co-counsel is clearly a publicity stunt designed to generate sympathy. We move to dismiss on grounds of improper representation. Collins nodded approvingly. Mr. Whitfield raises an excellent point. This court will not be manipulated by emotional theatrics. That's when Jamal pulled out his first legal folder. Your Honor, plaintiff objects to defendant's motion to dismiss. Under Kaplan and Drysdale versus the United States, the right to counsel of choice is fundamental, and courts cannot deny representation based solely on age or conventional credentials if the representative demonstrates competence. Collins stared at Jamal in stunned silence. The 10-year-old had just cited a Supreme Court case from memory and applied it correctly to their situation. Furthermore, Jamal continued, the defendant's characterization of our representation as a publicity stunt is unsupported by evidence and inappropriate for judicial proceedings. We're here to present facts and legal arguments, not to generate sympathy. Sarah watched in amazement as her son transformed before her eyes. The nervous boy from breakfast had become a confident legal advocate, speaking with clarity and precision that rivaled the expensive attorneys across the room. Collins recovered his composure and leaned forward menacingly. Son, this is your first and final warning. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt of court. Do you understand what that means? Yes, Your Honor. Contempt of court means showing disrespect to the court or its officers. But respectfully presenting legal arguments based on established precedent is not contempt. It's exactly what courts expect from all representatives. The tension in the room was electric. Judge Collins had been challenged by a 10-year-old who not only knew the law but was applying it with surgical precision. Very well, Collins said through gritted teeth. You want to play lawyer? Let's see how well you handle the real thing. Mr. Whitfield, please present your motion to dismiss. Whitfield stood confidently, clearly expecting to steamroll the amateur opposition. Your Honor, plaintiff's complaint fails to state a claim upon which relief can be granted. The allegations are conclusory and lack the specificity required under federal pleading standards. Jamal immediately stood up. Objection, Your Honor. That's not accurate. Collins's eyes flashed dangerously. On what grounds? Defendant mischaracterizes our complaint. We've provided specific dates, named individuals, documented patterns of discriminatory behavior, and cited exact violations of federal employment law. That exceeds the notice pleading standard established in Twombly and Iqbal. The courtroom was dead silent. A 10-year-old had just referenced two of the most important Supreme Court cases on civil procedure, and he'd done it correctly. Collins looked like he'd been slapped. This wasn't supposed to happen. Pro Se plaintiffs were supposed to be easy victories for institutional defendants, not legal challenges that required actual judicial analysis. Motion to dismiss is denied, Collins said reluctantly. We'll proceed to opening statements. As Whitfield sat down, looking decidedly less confident than before, Sarah squeezed her son's hand. They'd won their first battle, but the war was just beginning, and Judge Collins was starting to realize he might have underestimated his opposition. Jamal stood at the plaintiff's table with the poise of someone 3 times his age, organizing his notes with methodical precision. The courtroom remained captivated by what they'd just witnessed, a 10-year-old successfully defending his right to represent his mother. "Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready to present our case," Jamal announced. Collins glared down with barely concealed hostility. "Proceed, counselor," he said with dripping sarcasm. Jamal walked to the center of the courtroom carrying a single folder. "This case is about retaliation. My mother reported illegal discrimination against black patients and was fired 3 days later." He opened his folder and pulled out the first exhibit. Dr. Pemberton's prescription logs show systematic differences in pain management based solely on patient race. White patients received comprehensive treatment. Black patients were told to manage discomfort naturally. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Collins banged his gavel. "When my mother documented this pattern, she was exercising her legal obligation under federal whistleblower protection statutes. Instead of investigating, Mercy General terminated her employment." Marcus Whitfield looked increasingly uncomfortable as Jamal laid out evidence with professional competence. "But termination was only the beginning," Jamal continued. "Hospital administrators contacted other medical facilities, systematically destroying my mother's ability to find new employment." He presented a chart showing 15 job applications and rejections. 15 qualified applications, 15 rejections without interviews. "The statistical probability of this occurring randomly is less than 0.003%. Collins shifted uncomfortably. The boy was building a compelling case with mathematical precision. "Furthermore, Mercy General hired someone with 3 years less experience and lower performance ratings to replace my mother." Sarah watched in amazement as her son presented their case with impossible confidence. Every document was authenticated. Every argument was precisely cited. "The evidence shows systematic retaliation that violated federal anti-discrimination statutes and state whistleblower protection laws," Jamal concluded. Judge Collins found himself trapped. The legal arguments were sound. The evidence was compelling. But ruling for a black family represented by a 10-year-old would set an uncomfortable precedent. "Mr. Washington, your presentation is adequate. However, employment discrimination requires proof of intentional bias, not statistical anomalies." Jamal smiled slightly. "Your Honor, we have additional evidence that directly addresses intent." "Such as?" "Phone records, corporate communication logs documenting coordination between Mercy General and other hospital hiring managers." Collins felt his stomach drop. "Do you have corporate phone records?" "We subpoenaed them during discovery. Federal procedure allows plaintiffs to request relevant documents." The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. "There's something else, Your Honor," Jamal said, his voice taking on a tone that made everyone lean forward. "We've discovered a relevant precedent case that directly applies to our situation." Collins's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Which case?" Jamal paused for dramatic effect. "Thompson versus Morrison Industries, decided right here in this courthouse in 1995. Judge Collins's face went completely pale. "Your Honor looks like you might remember that case," Jamal observed innocently. "Should I quote from the court's opinion, or would you prefer to review it during recess?" The judge's hands trembled as he reached for his gavel. He needed time to think, to figure out how to handle what was about to become a legal nightmare. "This court will recess for 30 minutes, Collins announced abruptly. As the judge fled his bench, Sarah grabbed her son's arm. What just happened? Why did he look so scared? Jamal gathered their documents with satisfaction. "Because, Mom, Judge Collins just realized he's about to be held accountable by his own words." Judge Collins returned to his bench 30 minutes later, looking like a man facing his own execution. His usual commanding presence had been replaced by nervous energy as he avoided eye contact with the plaintiff's table. "Court is back in session," he announced, his voice lacking its earlier authority. "Mr. Washington, you mentioned a precedent case. Please elaborate." Jamal stood with quiet confidence, holding a thick manila folder like a weapon. The entire courtroom leaned forward, sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. "Your Honor, on March 15, 1995, this very court heard Thompson versus Morrison Industries. The case involved Patricia Thompson, a black nurse who was terminated for reporting discriminatory patient treatment practices." Collins's face grew paler with each word. Sarah watched her son with amazement. He was speaking with the precision of a seasoned attorney. "The facts of Thompson are virtually identical to our case," Jamal continued. "A healthcare worker reported racial discrimination, faced immediate termination, then discovered her employer had coordinated with other facilities to prevent her from finding new employment." Marcus Whitfield sensed danger and stood quickly. "Your Honor, plaintiff is mischaracterizing a decades-old case that has no bearing on current circumstances." "Actually, Mr. Whitfield, I have the complete court record right here," Jamal said, opening his folder with theatrical timing. "Would you like me to read directly from the court's opinion?" Collins gripped his gavel with white knuckles. "That won't be necessary." "I think it is necessary, Your Honor, because the legal reasoning from that case establishes binding precedent for exactly our situation." Jamal's voice grew stronger as he pulled out the printed pages. "May I quote from the court's ruling?" "Mr. Washington, I'm familiar with my own—" Collins caught himself, but it was too late. "Your own ruling, Your Honor?" Jamal's eyebrows raised innocently. "So you do remember presiding over Thompson versus Morrison Industries?" The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Collins had just admitted he remembered the case, which meant he couldn't claim ignorance of the precedent he'd established. "Yes, I presided over that case," Collins said through gritted teeth. "Excellent. Then you'll remember your exact words from page 12 of the court's opinion." Jamal held up the document and began reading in a clear, carrying voice. Quote, "No employee should face termination for fulfilling their moral and legal obligation to report discriminatory practices. When medical institutions prioritize reputation over patient welfare, they violate not only federal employment law, but the fundamental principles upon which our healthcare system is built." Sarah felt chills run down her spine. Her son was using Judge Collins's own words against him in front of a packed courtroom. "Furthermore," Jamal continued, "you wrote, 'This court will not tolerate institutional retaliation against healthcare workers who courageously speak truth to power. The law exists to protect those who protect others, and this court will enforce that protection without hesitation or compromise.'" Collins looked like he was having a stroke. The words he'd written 29 years ago were now boxing him into a legal corner with no escape. "Your Honor," Jamal said, his voice taking on the tone of a prosecutor closing an airtight case, "in Thompson, you ruled that coordinated employer retaliation violated federal whistleblower protection statutes. You awarded the plaintiff full back pay, punitive damages, and attorney fees." "The circumstances were different," Collins said weakly. "Were they?" Jamal pulled out a comparison chart he'd prepared. "Patricia Thompson, black nurse, reported patient discrimination, fired within days, blacklisted by coordinated employer action. Sarah Washington, black nurse, reported patient discrimination, fired within days, blacklisted by coordinated employer action." The parallels were undeniable. Every person in the courtroom could see that the cases were legally identical. "Your Honor, you also wrote in Thompson, 'Pattern evidence of coordinated blacklisting constitutes conspiracy to violate civil rights, regardless of the employer's claimed justifications.'" Jamal's voice rose with confidence. "We have documented proof that Mercy General contacted 15 other hospitals to prevent my mother from obtaining employment." Collins was trapped. His own precedent demanded he rule in favor of the Washingtons, but doing so would mean admitting he'd been inconsistently applying justice for years. The law doesn't change based on the race of the defendant or the age of the attorney presenting the case, Jamal said, delivering his final blow. Your Honor established clear legal standards in Thompson. Those standards apply equally to our case today. Marcus Whitfield made one desperate attempt to save his client. Your Honor, the plaintiff is a child attempting to manipulate this court with outdated— Mr. Whitfield, Collins interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. The precedent is clear. The legal reasoning I established in Thompson applies to this case. The courtroom held its breath as Judge Collins stared down at the legal documents that had trapped him in his own contradictions. Based on the evidence presented and the legal precedent established by this court in Thompson v. Morrison Industries— Collins paused, the words catching in his throat like bitter medicine. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. For a moment, the courtroom was completely silent. Then chaos erupted. The gallery burst into applause and cheers. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Jamal stood perfectly still, letting the magnitude of their victory sink in while the room celebrated around them. Judge Collins banged his gavel repeatedly, but his heart wasn't in it. He'd been outmaneuvered by a 10-year-old using his own legal reasoning, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. "Order! Order in the court!" Collins shouted, but his voice cracked with the weight of his humiliation. Marcus Whitfield slumped in his chair, his expensive suit suddenly looking less impressive. Mercy General's other attorneys shuffled papers frantically, trying to process how they'd just lost a major employment discrimination case to a child. Furthermore, Collins continued, his voice barely audible over the continuing murmurs, the court awards plaintiff full back pay in the amount of $120,000, punitive damages of $200,000, and attorney fees. Sarah gasped. They'd not only won, they'd won big enough to completely rebuild their lives. Additionally, Collins said, each word seeming to cause him physical pain, the court orders Mercy General Hospital to cease all blacklisting activities and to issue a formal letter of recommendation from Ms. Washington to any prospective employer who requests one. Jamal finally allowed himself a small smile. Justice wasn't just theoretical anymore, it was real, it was happening, and it was changing their lives in real time. Your Honor, Jamal said, his voice cutting through the courtroom noise, we also request that the court order sensitivity training for Mercy General's hiring practices to prevent future discrimination. Collins stared down at the boy who had just taught him a lesson about consistency, fairness, and the power of preparation. Granted, the defendant will implement comprehensive anti-discrimination training within 60 days. As the judge prepared to dismiss the court, something unprecedented happened. The people in the gallery began standing one by one, creating a spontaneous standing ovation for the 10-year-old who had just delivered justice against impossible odds. Sarah pulled her son into the tightest hug of his life. Baby, you did it. You actually did it. We did it, Mom, Jamal whispered back. We proved that truth is stronger than power when you know how to use it. Outside the courthouse, word of the victory had already begun spreading. Local news crews arrived to interview the family who had just made legal history. Other families who had been dismissed by Judge Collins approached them, asking if Jamal could help with their cases too. Son, what are you going to do next? A reporter asked, shoving a microphone toward Jamal. I'm going to study harder, he replied, with the same quiet confidence he'd shown in court. There are a lot of people who need help, and I want to make sure I know enough law to help them all. 3 days later, Sarah received her first job offer in months, then another. Word had spread through the medical community that she was the nurse whose son had defeated Mercy General's legal team, and suddenly everyone wanted to hire someone with that kind of principled courage. But the most satisfying moment came 2 weeks after the trial when Dr. Pemberton was quietly asked to resign from Mercy General following an internal investigation into his discriminatory prescribing practices. The hospital couldn't afford to keep him after a 10-year-old had exposed their institutional racism in open court. Judge Collins, meanwhile, found himself under review by the State Judicial Conduct Board. Several other families had come forward with complaints about his inconsistent rulings, all pointing to the Washington case as evidence of his biased judicial behavior. Sarah framed the court judgment and hung it in their new apartment, a bright, spacious place with a separate room where Jamal could spread out all his legal books without cluttering the kitchen table. "Mom," Jamal said one evening as they unpacked boxes in their new home, "do you think Judge Collins learned anything from what happened?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I think he learned that underestimating people because of their age or race is a dangerous mistake. And I think he learned that his own words have power, whether he remembers writing them or not." "Good," Jamal said, pulling out a new law book he'd bought with his first consulting fee from helping the Rodriguez family with their housing discrimination case. "Maybe next time he'll think twice before dismissing someone who looks different from him." As Sarah watched her son dive into another legal textbook, she realized their victory had been about more than money or jobs. They'd proven that justice was possible when people refused to accept that powerful institutions couldn't be challenged. And they'd proven it using nothing but knowledge, courage, and the unwavering belief that truth would eventually triumph over prejudice. 6 months later, Jamal Washington sat in Harvard Law School's summer program for gifted students, the youngest participant in the program's history. His story had spread far beyond their small courthouse, inspiring young people across the country. The boy who had been told he didn't belong in a courtroom was now fielding scholarship offers from top universities. But Jamal's favorite moments still happened at their neighborhood community center, where he held free legal advice sessions every Saturday morning. "The law belongs to everyone," he would tell families who couldn't afford attorneys, not just people who can afford expensive lawyers. Sarah watched her son help Mrs. Rodriguez with tenant rights, assist the Johnson family with medical debt, and draft complaints for veterans whose benefits had been denied. Each case proved that justice didn't require a law degree. It required knowledge, preparation, and courage. Their victory had ripple effects nobody predicted. Judge Collins quietly retired early. 3 other families successfully sued employers using Jamal's legal strategies. Mercy General implemented comprehensive anti-bias training, becoming a model for hospitals nationwide. Most importantly, their story changed how people thought about power and possibility. If a 10-year-old could defeat institutional discrimination using library books and determination, what excuses did adults have for accepting injustice? "You know what the best part is?" Sarah asked as they walked home from another legal clinic. "What's that, Mom?" "You're still just getting started. Imagine what you'll accomplish with that law degree." Jamal grinned, carrying new cases from people who needed help. "I can't wait to find out." Their story proves something powerful. When people tell you that you're too young or don't belong somewhere, they're afraid of what you might accomplish if you refuse their limitations. Knowledge is power when you have courage to use it. Justice is possible when you're willing to fight for it. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. Jamal didn't just win a legal case. He proved ordinary people can hold powerful institutions accountable when they refuse to be intimidated. What injustice have you witnessed that needs someone to speak up? What would happen if you stopped accepting that's just how things are? Share this story with someone who needs to remember their voice matters. Like if you believe knowledge and courage can overcome any obstacle. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people achieving extraordinary justice. The world needs more people like Jamal, people who refuse to be told they don't belong. What are you going to do with your power?
At Black Voices Uncut, we don't polish away the pain or water down the message. We tell it like it is because the truth deserves nothing less. If today's story spoke to you, click like, join the conversation in the comments, and subscribe So you'll be here for the next uncut voice.
These people shouldn't be allowed in places meant for real customers. The waiter deliberately pours ice water over a black father's expensive suit, smirking. The upscale restaurant falls silent as the Daniels family sits humiliated at their table. What should have been a joyous graduation celebration has turned into a public degradation. Their waiter Blake stands with the empty pitcher, contempt visible beneath his thin veneer of false concern. "Oops," Blake announces theatrically, ensuring nearby diners hear every word. Some folks just don't understand proper etiquette in establishments like this. The father, Anthony Daniels, rises slowly. His expression remains unnervingly composed as water drips from his ruined suit. He reaches into his pocket and extracts a card. "Actually, I'm Anthony Daniels, CEO of Pinnacle Restaurant Group. I own this place, and 37 others nationwide." The waiter's face drains of color. "You're fired, effective immediately." But this moment of justice was only the beginning of something much bigger. The Daniels family approaches Costello's, an upscale Italian restaurant gleaming with polished glass and ambient lighting. Anthony adjusts his tailored suit as his wife Vanessa smooths her elegant dress. Their teenage daughter Jasmine practically floats in her graduation outfit, while 10-year-old Tyler fidgets with his tie. "Best Italian in Chicago," Anthony says, not revealing his recent acquisition of the restaurant. He wants to experience Costello's authentically, see how customers are really treated. The hostess greets them with professional warmth. "Welcome to Costello's. Do you have a reservation?" "Daniels, table for 4, Anthony responds. "We're celebrating my daughter's graduation." "Congratulations!" The hostess beams at Jasmine. "Right this way." As they follow her through the dining room, waiter Blake Henderson notices their approach. His smile falters, eyes narrowing slightly. He exchanges a quick glance with manager Thomas Fleming, who responds with an almost imperceptible nod. Blake approaches their table with visible reluctance. "Welcome." His greeting lacks the warmth offered to nearby tables. He stands stiffly, forgetting to provide menus until Anthony politely requests them. "Today's specials are..." Blake rushes through descriptions, deliberately speaking in a condescending, oversimplified manner. "The fish is fresh." He emphasizes the word as if explaining to children. At the next table, Blake transforms. He's attentive, knowledgeable, offering wine pairings and detailed descriptions to the white couple seated there. The contrast is striking. "We'd like to start with the calamari and the bruschetta," Anthony says, maintaining his composure while noting Blake's behavior. "And could I see your wine list?" Vanessa adds politely. Blake returns with a wine list, sliding it toward Anthony. "The prices are listed on the right," he says pointedly. Anthony selects an expensive bottle. "We'll have the Barolo, 2015. Blake raises his eyebrows. "Are you sure about that price point? Perhaps I could suggest something more appropriate?" Anthony meets his gaze steadily. "The Barolo will be fine, thank you." "It's your money. Mr. Daniels." Blake deliberately mispronounces the name, despite Anthony's earlier clear introduction. As Blake walks away, he whispers something to another server while glancing back at the Daniels family. Both snicker before separating. Tyler looks up at his father. "Dad, why is that man being weird?" Anthony places a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "Some people have trouble seeing past their own prejudices, son." What the server doesn't realize is that every slight is being mentally cataloged by someone who has the power to do something about it. The Daniels family approaches Costello's, an upscale Italian restaurant gleaming with polished glass and ambient lighting. Anthony adjusts his tailored suit as his wife Michelle smooths her elegant dress. Their teenage daughter Jasmine practically floats in her graduation outfit, while 10-year-old Tyler fidgets with his tie. "Best Italian in Chicago," Anthony says, not revealing his recent acquisition of the restaurant. He wants to experience Costello's authentically, see how customers are really treated. The hostess greets them with professional warmth. "Welcome to Castello's. Do you have a reservation?" "Daniels, table for 4, Anthony responds. "We're celebrating my daughter's graduation." "Congratulations!" The hostess beams at Jasmine. "Right this way." As they follow her through the dining room, waiter Blake Henderson notices their approach. His smile falters, eyes narrowing slightly. He exchanges a quick glance with manager Thomas Fleming, who responds with an almost imperceptible nod. Blake approaches their table with visible reluctance. "Welcome." His greeting lacks the warmth offered to nearby tables. He stands stiffly, forgetting to provide menus until Anthony politely requests them. "Today's specials are..." Blake rushes through descriptions, deliberately speaking in a condescending, oversimplified manner. "The fish is... fresh." He emphasizes the word as if explaining to children. At the next table, Blake transforms. He's attentive, knowledgeable, offering wine pairings and detailed descriptions to the white couple seated there. The contrast is striking. "We'd like to start with the calamari and the bruschetta," Anthony says, maintaining his composure while noting Blake's behavior. "And could I see your wine list?" Michelle adds politely. Blake returns with a wine list, sliding it toward Anthony. "The prices are listed on the right," he says pointedly. Anthony selects an expensive bottle. "We'll have the Barolo 2015. Blake raises his eyebrows. "Are you sure about that price point? Perhaps I could suggest something more appropriate?" Anthony meets his gaze steadily. "The Barolo will be fine, thank you." "It's your money, Mr. Daniels." Blake deliberately mispronounces the name despite Anthony's earlier clear introduction. As Blake walks away, he whispers something to another server while glancing back at the Daniels family. Both snicker before separating. Tyler looks up at his father. "Dad, why is that man being weird?" Anthony places a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "Some people have trouble seeing past their own prejudices, son." What the server doesn't realize is that every slight is being mentally cataloged by someone who has the power to do something about it. Blake approaches with a tray of appetizers, deliberately avoiding eye contact with the Daniels family. He sets down plates of stuffed mushrooms and fried zucchini, neither of which they ordered. "Enjoy your appetizers," he says curtly, already turning to leave. "Excuse me?" Anthony calls, his voice level. "We ordered the calamari and bruschetta." Blake turns back, eyebrows raised in exaggerated surprise. "No, you ordered these items." He speaks louder, as if volume will make his lie more convincing. "Perhaps you misunderstood the menu descriptions?" Several diners at nearby tables glance over. Jasmine sinks lower in her seat, her graduation celebration tainted by unwanted attention. Anthony remains perfectly composed, though Michelle notices the slight tightening of his jaw. "I understand the menu perfectly," Anthony responds, opening it and pointing. "Calamari fritti and bruschetta classica. These are neither." Blake's eyes narrow. "I'll check with the kitchen," he says, tone suggesting the mistake couldn't possibly be his. As he collects the incorrect dishes, his movements are deliberately abrupt, jostling the table and nearly spilling their water glasses. Across the restaurant, manager Thomas observes the interaction. He makes no move to intervene, instead leaning against the bar with arms folded, watching the scene unfold with apparent amusement. "Maybe we should go somewhere else," Michelle suggests quietly. "This isn't how we should be celebrating Jasmine's achievement." Anthony subtly shakes his head. Under the table, he discreetly types a message on his phone. "Why is he being so mean?" Tyler whispers, confusion evident in his young voice. Anthony places his napkin in his lap, eyes never leaving Blake's retreating form. "Sometimes, Tyler, people judge others without knowing anything about them. But it's important that we maintain our dignity and show that their behavior doesn't diminish our worth." Blake returns minutes later with the correct appetizers. As he leans over to place the bruschetta, he deliberately drops breadcrumbs onto Anthony's shoulder. "Oh, so sorry," Blake says with theatrical insincerity. His apology is performed loudly for the benefit of onlookers, but his smirk betrays his true intent. Anthony brushes the crumbs from his suit jacket, maintaining unwavering eye contact with Blake, who shifts uncomfortably before retreating. Anthony's phone vibrates silently. A text message appears. "Security footage access granted. Recording everything now." He slips the phone back into his pocket, his expression revealing nothing of the methodical documentation now underway. Blake's performance has just earned him a starring role in a drama he never anticipated. The Daniels' entrees arrive 40 minutes later, long after surrounding tables who were seated after them have been served. Blake doesn't apologize for the delay. Instead, he hovers uncomfortably close to Michelle as he sets down her plate, the intrusion of personal space deliberate and discomforting. "Is there anything else you people need?" Blake emphasizes the phrase with subtle disdain. When Anthony requests more bread, Blake sighs dramatically. "I'll see what I can do." The bread never arrives. Throughout the restaurant, several staff members observe the situation with varying reactions. A few servers exchange uncomfortable glances but remain silent. One young server, a black woman with a name tag reading Tiana, watches with evident distress, though she keeps her distance, eyes darting nervously toward manager Thomas. Tyler drops his fork accidentally, the clatter drawing attention from nearby tables. Before Anthony can retrieve it, Blake materializes, making a theatrical production of cleaning up. "Let me get that for you," he announces loudly. "In establishments like Castello's, we typically hold our utensils like this." He mimes proper etiquette with exaggerated movements, looking pointedly at Anthony and Michelle. Perhaps the parents could demonstrate proper dining etiquette for their children? Jasmine stares at her plate, her graduation celebration thoroughly ruined. The achievement she'd worked so hard for now overshadowed by this public humiliation. Michelle reaches for her daughter's hand under the table, squeezing it reassuringly. "Our children have excellent manners," Anthony states calmly. "Accidents happen to everyone." Blake retreats momentarily, only to return with a replacement fork, dropping it carelessly on the table rather than placing it properly. Throughout the meal, he checks on surrounding tables frequently, deliberately bypassing the Daniels family. Anthony maintains his composure, though Michelle notices his increasing tension in the slight furrow of his brow. He's documenting every interaction, she realizes, recognizing the expression he wears during critical business assessments. The final incident occurs as they finish their main course. Blake approaches with a large pitcher of ice water, ostensibly to refill their glasses. As he reaches Anthony's side, he trips on nothing. The entire pitcher cascades over Anthony, drenching his suit and splashing onto Michelle. Ice cubes scatter across the table and floor. The restaurant falls silent. "These people shouldn't be allowed in places meant for real customers," Blake says, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. Then, with mock concern, "Oops, so sorry. Some folks just don't understand proper etiquette in establishments like this." The silence intensifies. Jasmine looks mortified. Tyler's eyes widen in shock. Michelle begins dabbing at her dress with a napkin, her hands trembling slightly with suppressed anger. Anthony rises slowly from his seat. Water drips from his ruined suit jacket, but his dignity remains intact. His expression is unnervingly calm as he reaches into his breast pocket, extracting a business card that somehow remained dry. "Actually," he says, voice steady and authoritative, "I'm Anthony Daniels, CEO of Pinnacle Restaurant Group. I own this place, and 37 others across the country." He holds the card between two fingers where Blake can clearly see his title. "You're fired, effective immediately." Blake's face drains of color. The pitcher hangs limply from his suddenly nerveless fingers. As stunned silence engulfs the restaurant, manager Thomas emerges from the shadows, his confident swagger replaced by visible panic. "Mr. Daniels, there must be some misunderstanding." Thomas approaches, sweat beading on his forehead despite the restaurant's cool temperature. His voice carries a forced joviality that doesn't reach his eyes. Anthony turns his steady gaze to the manager. "Is there? I've been watching you watch this unfold all evening. You did nothing. Thomas stammers. Blake is one of our most experienced servers. I'm sure he didn't mean... Michelle, Anthony interrupts calmly. Would you take the children to get cleaned up, please? His tone is gentle with his family, but leaves no room for discussion. Michelle nods, understanding the shift in her husband's demeanor. Come on, kids. She guides Jasmine and Tyler toward the restrooms, giving Anthony's arm a supportive squeeze as they pass. Once his family is out of earshot, Anthony's expression transforms, not to anger, but to something more focused, more determined. He pulls out his phone and dials. Diana, he says to his executive assistant, implement protocol dignity at Costello's Chicago, effective immediately. A pause. Yes, full documentation. I'm sending access codes for the security system now. Thomas hovers awkwardly, his confident demeanor completely evaporated. Behind him, the restaurant has become a hive of nervous energy. Servers whisper to each other. Customers pretend not to stare while watching intently. In the kitchen, panic spreads. Blake defends himself to fellow staff members, voice rising. How was I supposed to know? They didn't look like they could afford this place. You saw the suit he was wearing, a line cook counters. That's a $3,000 Armani. Whatever, Blake scoffs. Not my fault he can't take a joke. Tiana, the young server who had watched uncomfortably earlier, slips into the manager's office. She downloads security footage onto a flash drive, hands shaking but determined. In the women's restroom, Michelle helps Jasmine dry her splashed dress. I'm sorry your celebration was ruined, sweetheart. It's not your fault, Jasmine says quietly. Dad handled it really well. Is the bad waiter going to get in more trouble? Tyler asks, watching his mother dab at water spots on her dress. Michelle considers her answer carefully. When people behave unjustly, there should be consequences. But what's most important is how we respond. She kneels to eye level with her son. Your father showed strength by maintaining his dignity. That's a powerful lesson. Back in the dining room, Anthony makes another call. Sarah, legal department. I need immediate review of all complaints filed against Costello's Chicago in the past 12 months. He listens. Yes, particularly discrimination claims. And I want HR to pull all personnel records for Blake Henderson and Thomas Fleming. Thomas approaches again, hands spread placatingly. Mr. Daniels, please. We can comp your entire meal. This doesn't represent our values at Costello's. Anthony's gaze is penetrating. How many other families has he done this to while you watched? Thomas has no answer, his mouth opening and closing silently. Anthony's phone buzzes with an incoming text. He reads it, his expression unchanging despite the message. Found 3 previous discrimination complaints against both Blake and Thomas, all buried. He looks back at Thomas, who shifts uncomfortably under the scrutiny. I suggest you start updating your resume, Mr. Fleming. Outside the restaurant, a social media storm is already brewing as dinner patrons upload video of the confrontation. The Daniels family exits Costello's with dignity intact, despite their dampened clothing. Several patrons approach them in the parking lot, expressions sympathetic. Mr. Daniels? A woman steps forward, holding up her phone. I recorded what happened in there. It's already getting traction online. She turns the screen toward them, showing a social media post with rapidly climbing engagement numbers. Thank you, Anthony responds. But right now, my priority is my family. Once home, Anthony settles in his home office, suit changed but resolve undiminished. His laptop displays multiple windows, security footage from Costello's, employee records, complaint histories. Michelle brings him coffee, setting it beside stacks of documentation forwarded by his team. They found a pattern, Anthony says, voice tight. Not just Blake. The entire management structure has been enabling discrimination. The footage reveals damning evidence. Blake's behavior toward the Daniels family isn't an isolated incident. Thomas appears in several clips, observing similar treatment of other minority customers without intervention. 3 formal complaints in the past year alone, Anthony notes, scrolling through HR documentation. all dismissed as misunderstandings or customer overreactions. Michelle studies the files over his shoulder. Former employees? 5 terminated after reporting discriminatory practices. Anthony highlights sections of exit interviews. All pressured to sign NDAs. His phone rings. The regional director, Cameron Walsh. Anthony? Terrible misunderstanding tonight. Cameron begins without preamble, voice professionally concerned yet somehow dismissive. Blake Henderson has been with us for years, exemplary service record. I'm sure we can resolve this without drastic measures. Anthony listens silently, allowing the nervous monologue to continue. One bad employee shouldn't reflect on the entire establishment, Cameron continues. We could transfer him to another location. This isn't about one waiter, Anthony interrupts calmly. This is systemic. A full corporate investigation begins tomorrow. That seems excessive for 3 buried discrimination complaints, 5 terminated whistleblowers, security footage showing a pattern of behavior. Would you like me to continue? Silence on the line. Anthony creates a secure online portal, typing efficiently. The site offers anonymity and whistleblower protections for current and former employees across all restaurant locations in his group. Time to see how deep this goes, he murmurs, finalizing the site before distributing access through company channels. His phone rings again. Unknown number. Mr. Daniels? A female voice, hesitant yet determined. This is Tiana Williams. I was serving at Costello's tonight. She pauses, voice dropping. There's something you need to know about Manager Thomas and the regional director. This goes higher than you think. What Tiana reveals next confirms Anthony's suspicions. This isn't just about one restaurant. The next morning, Anthony meets Tiana at a quiet coffee shop downtown, away from Costello's. Her hands wrap nervously around her mug as she slides a USB drive across the table. I've been documenting everything for months, she explains. Thomas and Regional Director Cameron have a system. Complaints from minority customers get flagged and diverted directly to them instead of corporate HR. Anthony reviews the files on his laptop. Emails, texts, recorded conversations that Tiana had carefully saved. The evidence is unambiguous. They coached staff on how to handle certain customers, Tiana continues. Code words for giving worse service to people of color. If anyone complained, Thomas would personally resolve it, meaning bury it. And if staff objected? Anthony asks, though he already suspects the answer. Reduced hours, difficult shifts, eventual termination for performance issues, Tiana confirms. I've lasted because I pretended to go along with it, but it's been eating at me. Back at Pinnacle headquarters, Anthony convenes his executive team. The conference room screens displayed damning statistics from their HR review. 47% of discrimination complaints company-wide were improperly handled, the HR director reports. 23 employees across 12 locations were terminated after reporting racist treatment. 15 were pressured to sign NDAs. Several executives shift uncomfortably. Some appear genuinely shocked. Others seem more concerned about potential publicity damage. This extends beyond Costello's, Anthony states. We have a cultural problem that requires immediate systemic action. Chief Marketing Officer Philip Bennett raises concerns about brand reputation. The incident is trending on social media. Our PR team suggests a quick, contained response focusing on the single employee. No, Anthony interrupts firmly. We're not burying this or deflecting. We address it comprehensively and transparently. Meanwhile, Blake attempts damage control through a local news outlet. The interview airs on morning television. I'm being canceled over a simple accident, he claims, expression wounded. In today's climate, service workers are afraid to do their jobs without being accused of racism. The reporter appears skeptical. Witnesses report you made several discriminatory comments before the water incident. Taken out of context, Blake insists. Mr. Daniels is using his power and privilege to destroy my career over nothing. The segment cuts to viral video clearly showing Blake's deliberate actions and comments. His narrative crumbles in real time as the reporter questions the obvious discrepancies. Anthony's phone buzzes with an alert from legal. Blake Henderson has filed a wrongful termination lawsuit, claiming discrimination against him as a white employee and demanding reinstatement plus damages. Blake's lawsuit might be the perfect opportunity to expose the entire system in public record. Blake and Thomas appear on American Values Today, a right-wing talk show with a history of inflammatory coverage. Blake sits with perfect posture, playing the persecuted victim. "What happened to due process in America?" the host demands indignantly. "Mr. Henderson made an honest mistake, and now the woke mob wants his head." "I've served thousands of customers with nothing but respect," Blake claims, eyes appropriately mournful for the camera. "One spilled water pitcher, and suddenly my 20 years in the industry means nothing." Thomas nods sympathetically beside him. "We're seeing cancel culture destroy good people's lives over simple misunderstandings." The segment conveniently omits the viral videos showing Blake's deliberate actions and comments. Meanwhile, Anthony's anonymous reporting system floods with testimonials. His team works overtime categorizing responses. Former servers describing racist seating policies, kitchen staff recounting slurs used by management, customers detailing discriminatory treatment. 63 submissions in the first 12 hours, Diana reports, displaying the analytics dashboard. 82% report similar experiences to what your family encountered. Anthony studies the patterns emerging across multiple locations. The problem isn't isolated to Blake, Thomas, or even Cameron. It's embedded in unofficial practices throughout the organization. He personally calls several former employees who had been silenced. Their shock at hearing directly from the CEO quickly gives way to catharsis. "I thought nobody would ever believe me," admits former chef Jerome Wilson, voice breaking. "They fired me after I reported kitchen managers using racial slurs. Made me sign an NDA to get my final paycheck." "I believe you," Anthony responds. "And I want your input on how we fix this." That evening, Michelle joins Anthony in his home office, bringing a cup of tea as he reviews documentation. She studies the concern etched in his features. "What if we host a forum?" she suggests. "Give affected employees a chance to speak directly with leadership. Real change can't just come from the top down." Anthony considers this. "You're right. We need their voices, their experiences to guide the reforms." As they begin outlining the forum structure, Anthony's phone rings. The display shows Restaurant Industry Quarterly. "Mr. Daniels? I'm Emma Chen from RIQ. We've been investigating racism in fine dining for months, and your situation has broken open something much bigger." She pauses. "Dozens of workers from across the industry want to talk. This goes beyond your restaurant group. It's an industry-wide reckoning that's long overdue." As Anthony prepares to respond, he realizes this moment could transform not just his company, but the entire restaurant industry. The Pinnacle Restaurant Group boardroom falls silent as Anthony concludes his presentation. Emergency board meetings are rare. This one has lasted 3 hours. Financial reports and marketing strategies have been replaced by discrimination statistics and testimonials. "Questions?" Anthony asks, standing confidently before the stunned executives. Board member Victoria Kingsley leans forward. "Anthony, while this is concerning, is such an extensive response necessary? The publicity alone could—" "Let me be clear about something," Anthony interrupts. He switches slides to a photograph of himself from 15 years earlier, younger but recognizable, standing outside a courthouse. "Before I entered the restaurant industry, I spent 12 years as a civil rights attorney specializing in workplace discrimination cases." Murmurs ripple through the boardroom. "I didn't randomly decide to invest in restaurants," Anthony continues. "I chose this industry specifically because of its notorious problems with racism and classism. My goal was always to transform it from the inside." The revelation lands heavily. Some board members exchange glances, connecting dots they'd never noticed before. "Protocol dignity isn't something I created overnight in response to what happened to my family," Anthony explains, revealing comprehensive documentation. It's a program I've been developing for years. Anti-discrimination infrastructure designed specifically for the restaurant industry. He displays a detailed implementation plan, revamped hiring practices, promotion criteria, complaint procedures, customer service protocols, and mandatory training programs. We've been quietly collecting data for years, Anthony continues, cycling through meticulously documented incidents across their restaurant portfolio. What happened to my family confirmed what our data already showed. This is systemic. The chief financial officer raises concerns about implementation costs. Consider the costs of not acting, Anthony counters. Legal liabilities, staff turnover, reputation damage, lost customers. Discrimination is expensive. Inclusion is profitable. The vote is unanimous. Protocol dignity will be implemented company-wide, effective immediately. That evening, Anthony finds Michelle in their bedroom, reading through employee testimonials he'd brought home. "These are heartbreaking," she says. "So many people experienced what we did, but without the power to do anything about it." Anthony sits beside her, shoulders heavy with responsibility. "I keep thinking, if this happens to us, with all our privilege and position, what happens to families without that protection?" Michelle takes his hand. "That's exactly why you're in this position. Your experiences as a black man and your skills as an attorney created this opportunity. Now you're using it." "I didn't want our family to become the example," Anthony admits, especially not Jasmine. Her graduation celebration became a lesson in how the world still sees us. She asked to speak at the employee forum, Michelle reveals. She wants to share her perspective as both a black teenager and the daughter of the CEO. Anthony's surprise gives way to pride. "She's braver than I was at her age." "She has you as an example," Michelle responds. "She watched you respond with dignity and strategic action rather than just anger." Their conversation is interrupted by Jasmine knocking on the doorframe. "Dad, can I show you what I'm thinking of saying at the forum?" Anthony feels a complex mix of emotions, pride in his daughter's courage, regret that she needs such courage in the first place, determination to create meaningful change. "Of course," he says, making room for her to join them. The next morning, as final preparations for the employee forum are underway, Anthony receives word that several major restaurant groups are anxiously monitoring his next moves. Some have already begun quietly reviewing their own practices, concerned about becoming the next exposed case. In his office, Anthony reviews Jasmine's speaking notes. Her perspective is powerful, describing how it felt to have a celebration of her academic achievement transformed into a lesson in racial discrimination. Her words capture something statistics cannot: the human cost of allowing such behavior to continue. "This is excellent," he tells her. "Your voice will make a difference." "Do you think anything will really change?" Jasmine asks, the weight of the question revealing her awareness beyond her years. Anthony considers his answer carefully. "Systems don't change overnight, and some people never change their hearts. But we can change structures, policies, expectations, and consequences. We can make discrimination expensive and difficult while making inclusion valuable and rewarding." "That's not very inspirational, Dad," Jasmine observes with a hint of a smile. "The truth rarely fits on an inspirational poster," Anthony replies. "But here's another truth. Change happens when those with power use it to amplify the voices of those without it. Your voice matters, Jasmine. People will listen because of who I am, but they'll remember because of what you say." As father and daughter prepare to change their industry together, the ripple effects of one waiter's actions are about to become a tidal wave. The lawsuit lands with a thud on Anthony's desk. Blake Henderson vs. Pinnacle Restaurant Group claims wrongful termination, defamation, and reverse discrimination. Blake demands reinstatement, back pay, and punitive damages. "He's serious about this?" Anthony asks Sarah Chen, Pinnacle's chief legal officer. "He found an attorney willing to take it on contingency," Sarah explains. "They're playing to media narratives about cancel culture, but legally?" She shakes her head. "It's meritless." 3 days later, Blake's attorney withdraws from the case after Sarah presents their evidence. Security footage from multiple angles, documented pattern of complaints, testimony from other staff members, and Blake's own incriminating statements to co-workers. "Your client lied to you," Sarah informs the attorney during their conference call. "We have him on record telling kitchen staff he deliberately targeted the Daniels family." The employee forum transforms Pinnacle's headquarters. The main conference center, typically reserved for shareholder meetings, now hosts current and former employees from across the restaurant group. The space buzzes with nervous energy as Anthony takes the stage. "Thank you for your courage in being here today," he begins. "Some of you risked jobs, references, even violated NDAs to speak truth. That stops now. Pinnacle is voiding all non-disclosure agreements related to discrimination or harassment claims, effective immediately." A ripple of surprise moves through the audience. "We're here to listen," Anthony continues, "because meaningful change requires understanding the full extent of the problem. Your experiences aren't isolated incidents. They're evidence of systemic failures that we're committed to addressing." Over the next 3 hours, employees share experiences that confirm the problem extends far beyond one restaurant or manager. A former host describes being instructed to seat white customers in preferred sections. A bartender recounts managers discussing which servers were appropriate for serving VIPs. A line cook describes racial slurs used casually in kitchens. When Jasmine Daniels steps to the microphone, the room grows exceptionally quiet. "I'm here because what happened to my family isn't unique," she begins, voice steady despite her youth. "The only difference is that my dad was in a position to do something about it." She describes watching her graduation celebration transform into a public humiliation. "I was proud of my accomplishments that day. I'd worked hard, but in that restaurant, none of that mattered. What mattered was how we looked." Her perspective lands with particular impact. The innocent celebration tainted by discrimination, viewed through a teenager's eyes. "What happened to us made the news because of who my dad is. But it happens to families every day. The difference is, most people don't own the restaurant." After the forum, Anthony announces comprehensive reforms. An independent review board will oversee discrimination complaints. Anti-bias training becomes mandatory for all employees. Hiring and promotion policies are overhauled to address systemic inequities. Anonymous customer feedback systems are implemented with specific metrics tracking equal treatment. Several executives who had been complicit in covering up previous complaints quietly submit their resignations rather than adapt to the new standards. Cameron Walsh, the regional director who buried complaints at Costello's, attempts to negotiate a generous severance package. "I've been with Pinnacle for 15 years, he argues in Anthony's office. "My record speaks for itself." "Indeed it does," Anthony responds, sliding a folder across the desk. 327 complaints processed under your supervision. 84% from minority customers or staff were dismissed without investigation. Only 12% of complaints from white customers received the same treatment. He closes the folder. "Your severance is 2 weeks' pay. Standard for termination with cause." New leadership emerges. Anthony promotes Tiana Williams from server to a newly created corporate role focused on restaurant culture and inclusion. Her first task, developing metrics to track progress on equity goals across all locations. Media coverage intensifies as Restaurant Industry Quarterly publishes its major investigation. The article features Anthony's case prominently, but reveals discrimination as endemic throughout fine dining. Former employees from other restaurant groups come forward with similar stories, inspired by Pinnacle's transparency. The Daniels incident was a tipping point, the article concludes. What began as one waiter's racist actions has exposed an industry-wide problem that can no longer be ignored. Anthony leverages his influence with suppliers and industry associations, making it clear that Pinnacle will prioritize partnerships with companies that share their commitment to equity. "Our purchasing power exceeds $300 million annually," he reminds reluctant industry leaders during a conference call. "We'll direct that toward partners who demonstrate concrete commitments to inclusion." Other restaurant groups begin reaching out. Some approach defensively, concerned they might be the next target of public scrutiny. Others appear genuinely committed to change, seeking guidance on implementing similar reforms. Anthony engages selectively, prioritizing those who demonstrate sincerity. "We're not interested in performative changes," he explains to his team. "We're looking for partners committed to structural reform." 6 weeks after the incident at Costello's, the Daniels family shares a quiet dinner at home. The formal dining room, with its elegant table setting, offers a stark contrast to their experience at the restaurant. Michelle places a cake in the center, a belated celebration of Jasmine's graduation. "This is nice," Jasmine says, looking around at her family. "Better than that restaurant anyway." Tyler, ever direct at 10 years old, asks the question that's been on his mind. "Dad, did the bad waiter learn his lesson?" Anthony considers how to answer, aware that his children are learning how justice functions in an imperfect world. "Some people change when confronted with their behavior," he explains carefully. "Others don't. But either way, we've helped make dining safer for other families. Sometimes that's the best we can do. Make things better for those who come after us, even when the person who did wrong doesn't learn." "Is that enough?" Jasmine asks, the question weighted with emerging adult understanding of systemic inequity. "It has to be," Michelle answers softly. "We can't control how others respond. We can only control our own actions and use whatever influence we have to create better systems." Anthony receives a text from Diana. Blake Henderson has requested a private meeting, claiming he wants to apologize. His team has discovered that Blake and Thomas plan to wear recording devices, arranged by a conservative media outlet hoping to catch Anthony making damaging statements. "Do you have to work tonight?" Tyler asks, noting his father's attention to the phone. Anthony puts the device away. "No, tonight is for us. Everything else can wait." He looks around the table at his family. Michelle's quiet strength, Jasmine's emerging conviction, Tyler's innocent perception, and recognizes what truly matters. The systems may change slowly, but this moment, this celebration of his daughter's achievement, finally happens without discrimination or humiliation intruding. To Jasmine, he raises his glass, "Your future is bright, and you'll help make the world brighter for others." As the family celebrates, Anthony doesn't yet know that Blake's planned ambush will backfire in ways that will expose far more than one waiter's bigotry. Despite knowing about the wires, Anthony agrees to meet Blake and Thomas. He chooses the conference room at Pinnacle headquarters, neutral territory with his legal team present. "Record everything," he instructs security, "openly and transparently." Blake and Thomas arrive with poorly concealed confidence. Their expressions falter when they see the recording equipment prominently displayed on the conference table. "Welcome," Anthony greets them. "As you can see, we'll be documenting this conversation from our end as well." Blake shifts uncomfortably, exchanging glances with Thomas. The hidden recording devices in their breast pockets suddenly feel obvious, their plan to capture out-of-context statements already compromised. "Mr. Daniels," Blake begins, tone carefully contrite. "I wanted to personally apologize for the unfortunate incident at Costello's. My actions were inappropriate, and I deeply regret how I treated your family." Thomas nods earnestly. "We both recognize that mistakes were made, and we're committed to learning and growing from this experience." Anthony listens silently, allowing them to continue their performance. When they finish, he opens a folder containing printed documents, photographs, and transcripts. "I appreciate you coming today," he responds evenly. "Before we continue, I'd like to share some information." He lays out evidence methodically. Security footage showing Blake's deliberate water spill, transcripts of Blake's discriminatory comments to other staff, documentation of Thomas enabling similar behavior with other customers, testimony from former employees who experienced harassment. "This isn't about one incident with my family," Anthony explains calmly. "This is about a pattern affecting dozens of people over years." Blake's rehearsed contrition begins to crack. Thomas stares at the evidence, particularly the documentation tying him to Cameron Walsh's systematic burial of complaints. You have two options, Anthony continues. Participate honestly in a restorative justice process with those you've harmed, or face a public legal battle you cannot win. I'm not interested in punishment for its own sake. I want accountability and change. Thomas glances at the door, visibly calculating his options. Blake's face flushes red. Restorative justice? Blake scoffs, mask of remorse evaporating. You mean public humiliation? Self-flagellation for the crime of spilled water? For the crime of deliberate discrimination, Anthony corrects. Against my family and many others. This is ridiculous, Blake snaps, rising from his chair. You people always make everything about race. I've served all kinds of customers for 20 years. You people? Anthony repeats quietly. Blake's composure disintegrates completely. Yes! You people playing the race card whenever something doesn't go your way. I didn't do anything wrong. You're just another entitled The slur hangs in the air. Thomas physically recoils from Blake, suddenly desperate to create distance. I think we have what we need, Anthony says to his legal team. He turns back to Blake. That performance might have worked for your media friends, but you just revealed your true character on multiple recordings. The planned ambush piece by the conservative outlet never airs. Instead, they quietly distance themselves from Blake, whose unedited outburst proves too toxic even for their audience. Thomas, seeing the inevitable outcome, distances himself from Blake as well. I want to take the restorative justice option, he tells Anthony as they leave. I was wrong. I enabled this culture, and I need to make amends. Over the following weeks, Thomas participates in anti-bias education and begins the difficult work of making amends. He meets with former employees who experienced discrimination under his management, listening to their experiences without defensiveness. Blake refuses the restorative justice path, instead doubling down on claims of victimhood. His media appearances grow increasingly fringe as mainstream outlets avoid him. Former colleagues and customers come forward with additional accounts of his behavior from previous workplaces. When Blake applies for positions at other restaurants, his reputation follows him. Managers Google his name and find the viral videos, his discriminatory outburst in Anthony's office, and testimonials from former coworkers. Doors close before he can even interview. 6 months later, Thomas speaks at an industry conference on recognizing and addressing unconscious bias in restaurant management. He doesn't portray himself as a hero or seek redemption narratives. He simply shares what he learned through his mistakes and the harm they caused. I was part of the problem, he admits to the audience. Now I'm trying to be part of the solution. As Thomas concludes his presentation, a legislative aide in the audience makes notes for an upcoming committee hearing on discrimination in public accommodations. The Illinois State Capitol hearing room buzzes with anticipation. Legislative Committee on Public Accommodations Chairman Senator Robert Garcia gavels the session to order. Today we examine discrimination in restaurant service, he announces. Our first witness is Anthony Daniels, CEO of Pinnacle Restaurant Group. Anthony approaches the witness table, placing a thick binder of documentation before him. The committee members lean forward, attentive to the man whose family's experience catalyzed a movement. Discrimination in restaurants isn't about isolated incidents, Anthony begins. It's about systemic patterns. He presents data collected across Pinnacle's 43 restaurants before implementing Protocol Dignity. The statistics reveal consistent disparities in service quality, wait times, table assignments, and complaint resolution based on customers' perceived race. Individual bad actors exist within systems that enable them, Anthony explains. Both must be addressed simultaneously. His testimony avoids sensationalism, instead offering concrete policy recommendations, stronger enforcement of existing public accommodation laws, clearer reporting mechanisms for customers experiencing discrimination, incentive programs for businesses implementing comprehensive anti-bias measures. The hearing stretches into afternoon, with testimony from industry representatives, civil rights advocates, and affected customers. Anthony's evidence-based approach provides a framework that transcends political divisions. Discrimination is bad for business, harmful to employees, and violates core principles of equal treatment. 2 weeks later, the Chicago Restaurant Alliance, representing over 200 establishments, announces industry-wide standards for anti-discrimination policies and reporting mechanisms. Some join reluctantly, fearing negative publicity. Others embrace the opportunity for meaningful change. We are committed to ensuring every guest receives equal, excellent service, their statement reads. Our industry can and must do better. Restaurant Industry Quarterly receives the James Beard Foundation Journalism Award for their investigation into racism in fine dining. Their reporting expands to cover other forms of discrimination, including against disabled patrons and LGBTQ+ employees. What began with the Daniels family has sparked broader examination of hospitality practices. Tiana Williams, now Pinnacle's Director of Inclusive Excellence, implements a certification program for restaurants meeting rigorous anti-discrimination standards. The Dignity Certified designation quickly becomes a mark of quality that conscious consumers seek when choosing dining destinations. It's not just about avoiding negative incidents, Tiana explains in a business magazine profile. It's about creating consistently excellent experiences for all guests, regardless of background. Pinnacle's restaurants see increased business and improved employee retention as their commitment to equity becomes known. Exit interviews reveal staff feel pride working for an organization with clear values and accountability. Anthony establishes a scholarship and training program specifically designed to create pathways to restaurant ownership for underrepresented groups. The initiative addresses the industry's persistent ownership disparities by providing capital, mentorship, and business development resources. Changing who serves is important, Anthony explains at the program launch. Changing who owns and leads is essential. Industry publications track the Daniels effect as it ripples through restaurant culture. Surveys show increased awareness of discrimination among both customers and management. Reporting mechanisms become standard practice. Training programs evolve beyond superficial diversity exercises to address structural barriers and unconscious bias. The changes aren't universal or perfect. Some establishments resist, claiming traditional service practices. Others implement performative changes without addressing underlying culture. But the direction of progress becomes clear and increasingly difficult to ignore. 6 months after his legislative testimony, Anthony receives an unexpected letter with a postmark from a small town 3 states away. The careful handwriting belongs to Thomas Fleming, whose journey from enabler to advocate has taken an unexpected turn. Anthony studies the letter, recognizing Thomas Fleming's name on the return address. He opens it carefully, uncertain what to expect. Dear Mr. Daniels, it begins. I've completed the restorative justice program and anti-bias education we discussed. These past months have transformed my understanding of discrimination and my role in perpetuating it. Thomas explains his journey, the difficult conversations with former employees he'd failed, the painful recognition of patterns he'd ignored, the gradual dismantling of justifications he'd built to protect himself from accountability. I'll never fully comprehend the harm I caused, Thomas writes, but I'm committed to preventing others from experiencing it. I've begun working with Restaurant Equity Alliance, training management staff on recognizing and addressing discriminatory practices. Anthony shares the letter with his family that evening. They gather in the living room, the space warm with familial comfort that contrasts sharply with their experience at Costello's. Do you believe him? Jasmine asks, skepticism evident in her voice. I believe people can change, Anthony answers carefully. But that change is demonstrated through consistent actions, not just words. Tyler, now 11, considers this. I hope he's really a good person now. Michelle watches her son's earnest expression. People are complicated, Tyler. They can learn and grow, but trust has to be earned, especially after it's been broken. How we respond is another opportunity to model our values, Anthony reflects. We can acknowledge growth without forgetting harm. After family discussion, they make a decision that surprises even Anthony. They will return to Costello's, not to test Thomas's sincerity, but to see for themselves how the restaurant has transformed. The following weekend, they approach the familiar facade of Costello's. The restaurant has been completely renovated, not just physically, but operationally. Under new management, the staff reflects Chicago's diversity. The atmosphere feels genuinely welcoming. A host greets them warmly, with no recognition of who they are, exactly what Anthony hoped to experience. They're seated promptly at a comfortable table, treated with the same professional courtesy extended to all guests. Their server, a young woman named Ava, presents menus with knowledgeable descriptions of specials. Her manner is attentive without hovering, respectful without condescension. Anthony observes similar treatment at surrounding tables, consistency that indicates cultural change, not performance. Midway through their meal, Ava returns with a look of realization. "You're Anthony Daniels, aren't you?" she asks quietly. "The CEO?" Anthony acknowledges his identity, prepared for the interaction to change. Instead, Ava simply says, "Thank you. The changes your company made have transformed this workplace. It's the best restaurant I've ever worked in." As they enjoy dessert, the celebration they originally intended finally happening in a space where they're treated with dignity, Jasmine makes an observation that strikes Anthony deeply. "What happened to us was just one visible instance of what many people experience without the power to drive change," she says. "We had a platform most don't have." Anthony nods, acknowledging this privilege and responsibility. "Which is why we must use whatever influence we have to create more equitable spaces. Not everyone can own the restaurant, but everyone deserves to be treated with dignity inside it." They toast to Jasmine's graduation again, the celebration reclaimed and transformed. The water stays firmly in glasses, served with respect by staff who see them as valued guests rather than unwelcome intruders. True power isn't in a title or wealth, Anthony reflects, watching his family enjoy a moment that should have been theirs all along. It's in using whatever influence you have to ensure dignity for everyone. Michelle squeezes his hand under the table, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they've traveled together, from humiliation to transformation, from individual incident to systemic change. The check arrives with a simple note. "Congratulations on your graduation, Jasmine. Your family's courage changed everything." 1 year later, Anthony stands at the podium of the National Restaurant Association's annual conference. The audience, owners, managers, and industry leaders from across the country, listens attentively as he presents data from Pinnacle's first full year implementing Protocol Dignity. "The numbers tell a clear story," Anthony explains, gesturing toward the projected graphs. "Customer satisfaction up 37%. Employee retention improved by 41%. Discrimination complaints down 96%. He pauses, allowing the statistics to register. But most importantly, these aren't just metrics. They represent real human experiences, people being treated with the dignity they deserve. Across town, Blake Henderson stocks shelves at a convenience store, his restaurant career effectively over. A television mounted near the ceiling plays footage of Anthony's keynote speech. Blake watches briefly, expression hardening, before turning away. His bitterness remains, but his ability to inflict harm on customers has been neutralized. The industry has moved forward without him. At Northwestern University, Jasmine Daniels leads a meeting of Equal Table, the student organization she founded focusing on addressing discrimination in campus dining services. The group has already successfully advocated for anonymous reporting systems and inclusive hiring practices. "It's not enough to react after incidents occur," she tells the gathered students, echoing her father's methodical approach. "We need proactive systems that prevent discrimination from happening in the first place." Anthony joins a private dinner with restaurant owners who have adopted versions of Protocol Dignity. The atmosphere is collaborative rather than competitive, a shared commitment to transforming industry culture. "We've made progress," says Gabriela Morales, owner of an upscale Mexican restaurant group. "But we're still facing resistance from old guard establishments claiming customers prefer traditional service." "Traditional for whom?" responds James Liu, whose family owns a successful chain of fusion restaurants. "Our customers appreciate knowing everyone receives equal treatment. It's become a selling point." The conversation turns to next steps, expanding their focus to address wage disparities, advancement barriers, and supplier diversity. What began with one incident has evolved into a comprehensive movement for equity throughout the food service ecosystem. Back home, the Daniels family hosts dinner for an expanded circle that includes Tiana, now a rising executive, and several key figures in their journey. The dining table that once served as a space to process humiliation now hosts celebration of collective achievement. Tyler, growing increasingly perceptive at 11, asks the question that brings the room to thoughtful silence. Would all this have happened if that waiter hadn't been mean to us? Anthony considers his son's question. "Sometimes meaningful change begins with painful moments," he responds. "But what matters isn't how it starts. It's who chooses to stand up, speak out, and do the difficult work of creating better systems." He looks around at the gathered faces, family, colleagues, allies who became friends through shared purpose. "Dignity isn't a privilege," Anthony concludes. "It's a right that must be defended for all." How would you have handled this situation differently? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and transformation, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Beat Stories for more powerful real-life dramas that will leave you inspired. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our newest uploads. Your support helps us continue sharing these important stories of courage and dignity.